Outrageous love means, one, we commit outrageous acts of love. Two, we protest. We protest because reality is outrageous love. We therefore can turn to the divine in ourselves and in the structure of the field of value and say, we protest. But when we protest, we're not screaming against God. We are the voice of the divine screaming out and demanding transformation. This is a wildly important week, and I want to go slow and careful. We want to talk this week about the following unbearably agonizing question, which is something like this. What the fuck? And I apologize for that word. Oriana and I have an agreement, so apologies. But after you look at the pain this week, how do we dare talk about the universal love story in a week in which 28,000 people died? And the expected death toll was 50,000. We're going to see a clip in a moment. Right? What does that mean? Remember, how do we talk about the universal love story? What does that even mean? Right? What kind of universe is it? Right? That allows, right, that kind of event to take place. Okay? What does the universal love story mean in the face of immense suffering? That's our question for today. And we dedicate this question completely and directly to our brothers and sisters in Syria, in Turkey, some in Lebanon. We're going to be deep in this and we're going to transform this, right? And it's an incredibly important, next, whatever it is, 40 minutes or so. So let's take this inside. David, give us the code, brother.
So this week's evolutionary love code is, we live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response is outrageous love. We live in a world of outrageous pain, and the only response is outrageous love. And I turn my word back to you, beloved Dr. Marc.
David, thank you. Thank you. Right? I mean, oh my God, right? We live in a world of outrageous pain, and the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. And I just want to ask you, if I can, brothers and sisters, I just want to say it again and just say it out loud wherever you are in the world. And just before we even talk about it, can we just feel it in our body? Okay? Oh my God, welcome, right? Right? Melissa, welcome, right? Welcome everyone. Welcome every single person. Welcome, like the deepest welcome in the world. Let's stay inside now, everyone. Okay, let's come together. Here we go. Welcome, right? We're welcome in Cosmos, but what does it mean to even talk about being welcome in Cosmos when 33,000 people, right? Colleen just wrote it in the chat box. 33,000 people didn't survive last week. What does it mean to be welcome in Cosmos? And when Cosmos is so obviously unfair in terms of what we understand fairness to be. And we have to do this for everyone in the world that's now asking this question. How do we talk about the universal love story in the face of outrageous pain? So we laid down last week these 10 principles of outrageous love. And the first principle was, we live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. So let's notice, okay, how does that work? So what's the first thing that this code and these principles are rejecting? And notice with me, my friend Elena, this is very subtle, it's very deep. As each one of these 10 principles actually needs to be unpacked. Each one is an entire world. This is a credo, and then there are volumes of heart to be poured into each one of these, and volumes of distinctions. So let's start with the first distinction. And in order to start with the first distinction, I want to ask Krista to show us a clip. Before we go into the distinction, we need to feel this in the space. We need to be willing to not turn away. So let's take a look at a clip, and from that holy text of pain, and I'm going to ask everybody not to look away. Not to look away. It's a short clip. It's a minute. But we have to be willing to take it inside. So take it away. Oh my God.
يلا فين الطريق يا شباب؟ ولد يلا ما شاء الله حركة ايدك يا رب يلا ها إذا عم تطلع لسيارة إسعاف لا البابا هون لا تخافي يا جميل عمو نور طلع علي لهون يا عمو نور بابا هون نور حكي البابا حكي ايوه ما شاء الله ما شاء الله ليك البابا حكي يا بابا حكي يا بابا الحمد لله على السلامة يا عمو الحمد لله على السلامة يا عمو الله أكبر ما شاء الله.
Right. Wow. Right. Allah Akbar. Could you see her face? Who saw her face, right? Who saw her eyes? Did you see the smile come into her eyes? Right? Who saw, right? Oh my God. Right? Oh my God. And there were so many scenes that didn't look that way. And there's so many scenes where there was just a limb found, right? Or a face severed from a body. We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. So what does that mean? So number one, my friends, and I want to try and go through just gently, tenderly, we're going to do sense making here. We're going to do sense making, or we're going to try and go through like one by one. We're going to do sense making, right? For reality itself. So one, the first response that we cannot give to outrageous pain, the response that's not kosher, is a response that's been given by the religions all through the ages. In some sense, suffering happens because people have sinned. Suffering happens because people have sinned. Or suffering happens because we've somehow invited that suffering into our life. And I've had conversations with many people who are, leading teachers in the human potential movement. Some of them are on my website. Others are heads of publishing houses, right? Others are heads of, major movements, all the names that you know. And what I would ask them, how do you actually deal with outrageous pain? The response was, in one way or another, you invited it into your life. Like, wow. What does that mean? What does that mean? I sat with my colleague, Byron Katie. He's a beautiful person. We were talking about a terrible story like this of outrageous pain. It's actually a story about my mother, who was buried alive when she was 4 years old in the Holocaust. And Byron basically understood suffering as that which you somehow invite into your life, and you tell a story that makes it suffering, but it's not about the objective back. It's about the story you tell about it that creates the suffering. And I said, Byron, you actually can't say that. You can only say that from the comfort of your life in upper middle class United States. What about my mother? And this dialogue is on my website. And Byron said, well, your mother could have imagined that she was in a dirt play box. and somehow finding her way out, because after all, she did find her way out. And my mother did find her way out. And I said to my friend Byron, Katie, that's obscene. And I actually said, if you want to stop this recording now, we can stop. And she said, no, let's do it. And she was wonderful. But she wouldn't relent position because there was a dogmatic orthodoxy. Because she wanted to hold a vision of a loving universe. And the only way she knew how to hold that was to say that suffering is actually created only by the story that we tell about the suffering. That's not correct. And in some sense, there are strains in all mystical traditions that understand suffering as being a created human experience, but at its depth, suffering is Maya, it's an illusion. So the first statement of the new story of value in cosmoerotic humanism, which is the story that we need to actually change the trajectory of human history. The first principle is we reject those positions categorically. Categorical rejection. Suffering is not Maya, it's not an illusion. Suffering is real. Okay? Suffering is real. And we take suffering seriously. That's the point. It's not an illusion. It's real. We reject that position categorically. Number one. We reject it if it's a position that says in the classical position of all the religions, you're suffering because you sin. We reject that version of the position. So one, we reject that position, suffering and sin. Two, we reject the position which is suffering is Maya. It's an illusion. No, suffering is real. We live in a world of outrageous pain means we're not willing to turn away. And when we call suffering an illusion, we're turning away. Critical. Three, we reject the New Age position or the human potential movement position, which says you're suffering because you somehow invited it into your life. And that's a classical position that appears, for example, at the Avatar seminars, and really one version or another appears at almost all New Age human potential movement forums. It's actually a restatement of the position of the religions. And just like it was the dogmatic orthodox position, which was a way of turning away from suffering, it's a new orthodoxy, a new dogmatism in the New Age human potential movement, which also turns away from suffering. Now, it's not that these were bad people, these were beautiful people. And so why did they insist in that position? Because they wanted to accomplish two things. One, they wanted to be able to experience reality as a love story. And they didn't know how to do it without saying, either you've sinned, or suffering is an illusion, or you invite it into your life. Those three possibilities. Even more, there's an underlying, not just they wanted to experience reality as a love story, they wanted to, understandably, have a dimension of control. Because if I suffer, and I don't know why, then I feel like I've completely lost control. Nietzsche, I was reading Nietzsche over the weekend. Nietzsche writes very beautifully, I can bear with any suffering if I know why. I'm paraphrasing. Because the why says I have some control. So let's say I'm suffering because I invited it into my life. Well, now I won't invite it into my life. I'll change that dynamic that attracts it to me. I can't tell you, I've suffered in my life, and I can't tell you how many people, well-meaning, right, have called me and said, Mark, this is how you've invited this into your life, because there's parts of you that are shadow, right, that you're now not owning, and you're projecting them into the public space, and then they're projected back at you. And that was one of 13 versions, right, of you've invited this into your life. That's really just a New Age restatement of sin. And the advantage of the position is, number one, you have control, but number two, it actually frees you from the obligation to respond, because in some sense, that person invited it into their life. So we categorically reject those positions, right? That's number one. That's critical. In other words, any form of theology, any form of New Age or religious right, or mystical, theologic, has to be utterly rejected. We have to actually look at the suffering head on and not turn away. Which is why we just saw that clip. We live in a world of outrageous pain, full stop. Full stop. No but, no if, no and, no theodicy, meaning no explanation of why God's still good even though God allowed this, or why the world is still a good place even though this happens. No. We just look at outrageous pain and we scream. We protest. We're devastated. And we live in the devastation without attempting to explain it away. But not only do we live in the devastation without attempting to explain it away, now the next step, we then turn to reality itself, to the real principle of reality, the principle of the real, the Atman, which is Brahman, the Mat, the Geist, the implicate order, the Ayin, the Adonai Elohim, the Great Spirit, the Great One, however you want to tell that story of the infinity of value that is cosmos. And some call it God or goddess. But however you want to tell that story, we turn to that principle as it lives in reality, as it lives in us. We turn to God and we say, and Oriana, I apologize, this is the last time we say, what the fuck? We cry out in protest. We protest. Prayer itself becomes protest. And we demand accountability from the divine. Ibrahim, the great father of Turkey and Syria, Ibrahim, in the book of Genesis, when the divine voice says, I'm going to destroy the evil of Sodom and Amorah, God has told Abraham, this is not good. These people are evil. They deserve to die. They are corrupt. Abram doesn't say, well, thank you, God. You're God and I'm obedient. And of course, if this is what you say, you're obviously omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipotent, and all-powerful, and omni-good, right? You're infinite goodness. So you're God. I'm just Abraham. Abraham says, no, I participate in the field of value. I participate in the field of divinity. God, no. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, is the text in Genesis. Will the God of the whole world, the judge of the whole world, will the judge of the whole world not do justice? And so Abraham holds God accountable, right? Ibrahim holds God accountable. Wow. When Moses is explained by the divine voice in the beginning of the book of Exodus, I have a plan. God says, here's the plan. You're going to go to Pharaoh. You're going to say, let my people go. Pharaoh will then increase their suffering, but then I'll step in and I'll ultimately liberate them. The early chapters of the book of Exodus, Pharaoh does exactly what the God voice said Pharaoh would do. Pharaoh increases the suffering by changing the accountability and the quota of bricks that need to be made. And Moses turns to God and says, Lama hareota la'am hazeh, God, why are you dealing evilly with these people, with these slaves? Why doesn't Moses say, oh, this is the divine plan. This is divine wisdom. This is divine omniscience. No, Moses is Moses and Ibrahim is Ibrahim because they challenge the divine voice and they demand justice. Now, stay close with me, okay? This gets so deep, it gets so beautiful, and it's so wildly heartbreaking and so wildly heart-opening. We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. It gets very deep now. What do we mean by that? The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. So there's two meanings, but one meaning, I want to start with the first meaning. One meaning is completely different than you might have thought. In other words, we turn to the divine force, the force of love in Eros and Cosmos, because we actually have a direct experience of love. We know that love is real. We stake our lives on love. Every song is a love song. We actually have a direct access to the experience of Eros being the animating force of reality. We actually know when you see that man taking out that girl, and he says, Allah Akbar, right? And you see just his voice of the masculine seeing, right, the little girl, and just the love just coming out of his voice. That love is real, right? We all know, we all have direct experience. And if we feel hurt by someone, we're devastated. And someone who we love dearly, right, doesn't see us or recognizes us or misunderstands us or leaves us, or we have to leave them, we're devastated. Our whole lives are love stories. The fabric of reality, the heart of existence itself is love, and we have direct access to the experience of love being real. Anthro-ontology, the mysteries are within us. We know love's real. And it's only because we know that love is real and that divinity is not merely omniscient. The field of value, the source of value is not only inside of us and not only all-knowing and not only holds us, right, in infinite power, but that actually we have a direct experience that we live in an intimate universe. And that actually divinity is not just the infinity of power, but what we might call the infinity of intimacy. And that the actual name of God is the infinite intimate. And that's the new name of God that we use in cosmorotic humanism in this new story of value. And it's only because God, both the God that lives inside of me, the goddess that incarnates in me, and the goddess that holds me, it's only because God, goddess, is the infinite intimate that Abraham and Moses and Lao Tzu in his way, and Blake in his way, and Thoreau in his way, right, and Confucius in a certain moment in his way, right? It's only because we realize that the field of value is a field of Eros, right? That we live in a field of outrageous love, that God is not just the infinity of power. I say it again, but the infinity of intimacy, and the name of God is the infinite intimate. And I say it again, not as information, not because I forgot that I said it, because I want to feel it again with you. It's only to the God who's the infinite intimate that I can turn and say, as Abraham did, will the judge of the whole world not do justice? It's only to the God who's the infinite intimate that I can scream, "Zelo fair" in Hebrew. It's not fair. It can't be this way. I can only protest if I live in a world that in my body, in my very beingness, I know needs to be fair. But I don't live in a world that's outrageous love, then there's no way of protesting outrageous pain. Because what's wrong with it? Right? It's ordinary. It's just what happens. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just part of the structure of life. So the reason we cry out and scream, we live in a world of outrageous pain, the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. It's only if we know there's the field of outrageous love, which is the intrinsic nature of reality, that we actually realize this pain is outrageous. This shouldn't be this way. It can't be that way. It's not allowed to be that way. Right? Wow. In other words, it's only when I understand that evil is a failure, suffering is a failure of intimacy. Right? It's only suffering, it's a failure of intimacy. It's only a moral wrong, it's a failure of intimacy. Does everyone get that? It's a big deal. So I'm just going to go to the chat box for a second. How many people are tracking? Okay, how many people are tracking? Right? Did you get how we're reading this? It's beautiful, right? We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response is outrageous love. So the simple way of reading it is, which is completely right, The first response is, oh my God, let's get to Syria and let's do everything we can in Syria and do everything we can in Turkey. And the world has not sufficiently, but the world has mobilized. This is a moment in world-centric consciousness has woken up, not sufficiently, but at least at some degree, and saying, oh my God, the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. And the response of outrageous love has to be to commit outrageous acts of love. And we need to have, right, 70 countries turn to Syria to put rescue teams on the ground. There are 16 on the ground right now. And there are thousands of men and women from international relief organizations combing through rubble. There are outrageous lovers, right, all over Turkey and Syria, which is unimaginable and beautiful. We need to commit outrageous acts of love. So that's one. But the second meaning of that text is we live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response is outrageous love. The only way we can actually recognize this is outrageous pain and that it can't be, and we can't allow for it, right, is that we know that reality actually demands fairness and demands integrity. Reality is a reality of Eros. Reality is a reality in which one of its core values is fairness, which is rooted in harmony, which is a right relationship between things. And so therefore we have to turn to Turkey, not this week, not next week. We have to turn to Turkey, and we got to say to Turkey. And again, this is just this week. Oriana's given me an exception. Oriana is my dear friend, and we had a discussion about using a particular word, right, in one mountain. But this week's an exception. We have to turn to Turkey and say, fuck. Like, why are you allowing what's called in Turkey amnesties in your building code when you know what happened in Turkey in 1939 and you know what happened in Turkey in 1999? Tens of thousands of people killed. You know very clearly that there's going to be more earthquakes. And yet, although you technically put a building code in place, most of those buildings, and let's just say it clearly, most of those buildings should not have collapsed. And the reason they collapsed was a failure of intimacy. That's why they collapsed. They collapsed because there's a practice in Turkey called amnesties, which is essentially corruption, which is essentially the win-lose metrics. Rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics, which actually governs society, the success story of each independent contractor, who basically ignores the building code. They get by the government what's called in Turkey an amnesty. I'm translating into English. And they build buildings, and I just want to get this. I want to get this. They build buildings knowing there's going to be more earthquakes. I'm going to get this clear, and I'm not going to turn away from this. Knowing there's going to be earthquakes, and knowing that those buildings will probably fall. What does that mean? The same in Syria. And what does it mean in Syria, where Bashar Assad is actually not concerned, right, about the refugees? He's concerned about his win-lose metrics and in his politics of brutality and evil again and again. And only if the aid comes through him and through the areas under his control will he distribute it. But we know historically he won't distribute the aid. And he's making a political power play as children are under rubble. And there's only one access road available into the tormented parts of Syria today that's open, when we need at least 7 or 8 roads. So I want to just track this with you for a second, because it's not only about Syria and Turkey, but actually we live in the first generation in human history in which we have the capacity to respond to natural disaster before it happens. Doesn't mean we can handle every disaster. Doesn't mean natural disaster doesn't exist. But for the first time in human history, we have the technology available and we have the resources available that actually no human being should be left outside the circle. We actually can develop technologies which actually can, with some degree of accuracy, predict earthquakes. Number one. Number two, we can enforce building codes that will actually ensure that literally the overwhelming majority of buildings will not collapse on children sleeping, adults sleeping, men and women sleeping. We actually can do that. And we can do that when we actually are intimate with the future. We feel what's coming. We deploy our technology, right, to support the most vulnerable among us, because no one's left out of the circle. We have that capacity today. We live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. And outrageous love means, as outrageous lovers, we can actually respond, right, to natural disaster in a way that no generation in history has ever been able to respond. Okay. Next point. Okay. And we're trying to work this through. Okay. You with me, friends? Are we together? Are we together, friends? Let's find this. Let's find this. Are we together? Let's find this. I'm going to go to the next step. I'm going to go to the next step. The next step is like crazy, insanely important. So why does this, right? Why does this happen, right? Why does this happen? Why does this happen? So I want to introduce with you one of the first principles and first values of Cosmos, which, together with my dear friend and interlocutor colleague, Zach Stein, we just really formalized 2 weeks ago, but we've been working on for a decade. And one of the first principles and the first values in Cosmos is what we might call the principle of mystery and gnosis. Gnosis means what we know. Mystery is what we don't know. The word mystery derives through a number of languages. It ultimately derives from the Hebrew, which is mystery is satir, that which is not known. Another way to say it is the hidden in the revealed. And the basic, I want to give you like a formal reading of it. I'm going to read it just kind of formally, and I'm going to try and unpack it for a second. But here we go. There's a mystery and there's gnosis. There's knowledge in all areas of Cosmos. And when we don't know something, that's not necessarily failure, epistemic failure. It's not that, wow, isn't it tragic we don't know it? No, it's actually unknowing is a quality of Cosmos. There's what we know and there's what we don't know. And I want to track this together because it's crazy important. Any attempt to give a definitive answer, right, to the problem of suffering is obscenity. That's where we began today. We never can try and storm the gates of heaven in this Promethean way, where the nature of the fire that we want to bring down from heaven is that we have an answer for everything. We don't. We don't. But our response is not blind faith. Our response is we protest. We demand answers from on high. Number one. Two, we commit outrageous acts of love. But three, we're willing, because we're mad lovers, because we're outrageous lovers, we're willing to live in the uncertainty. And I want to go deep into this for a minute, because this is where it all happens. This is what matters. So I want to try and catch this with you for a second, because it matters. This is everything. The reason we're willing to live in the uncertainty is not because we're idiots. It's not because we're faithful fools. It's because we have direct experiences, one after the other, of the intrinsic goodness of Cosmos. In other words, we actually have direct experiences that we live in a world of goodness, truth, and beauty. That we live in a world in which there's intrinsic value, in which Eros animates everything. And because we have a direct certainty of that experience, Aquinas, the great theologian in the Middle Ages, once wrote that his favorite verse in biblical text is taste and see that God is good. We actually have a direct experience of God's goodness. I'm sitting and eating, and I'm feeling my body digest the food through the cytochrome C structure in my body, protein structure. And I begin to get a sense of the dazzling complexity and beauty of my body functioning in this moment. And I see, and I'm blown away by a level of awe and radical amazement and wonder that's unimaginable. Just at the dazzling beauty and complexity of my body, right? That is somewhere between 37.2 trillion to 100 trillion cells and then an unimaginable number of molecules and atom all in dazzling, erotic synchronicity with each other. And we realize that actually my body is a love story. And we realize that the world, the molecular world, is a love story. And we realize that the cellular world, each cell, is a love story. And we realize that between us, reality is covered with love stories. And sometimes there's a huge tragedy. We create the boundary of the love story at the human level. We make it too small. We say the love story is only between this very small group of people, between this particular tribe or this particular race. That's a tragedy. We need to evolve love. We need to move the boundary. There can be no one left out. No one's a stranger. But actually, we actually have the direct experience in the world of matter, the molecular world, right? And in the world of life, the cellular world and the organismic world, all the way up the evolutionary chain, and in the human world, that actually what matters to us is taking care of each other. What matters to us is our love for each other. What matters for us is the depth of our devotion and the depth of our desire. And our devotion and our desire are both two expressions of reality as a love story. We desire each other. We desire contact with each other. We desire to hug each other and to hold each other. We want to touch each other. We want to touch each other physically and emotionally and existentially and psychologically and spiritually. And if we feel alone, if we feel isolated, if we feel alienated, we're devastated. Which is why if we don't have an experience of my interior touching your interior, our entire life is no longer good. We lose. It's not good for the human being to be lonely, screams one ancient text, right? Because loneliness, the experience of not knowing that I'm in a love story and not being able to actually touch you and have you touch me and our hearts touch each other, makes my life meaningless. And as we said earlier, it's why every song in every language across space and time is a love story. So actually, we know that love is real. And because we know that love is real, because we look in the face of a baby, we look in the face of the beloved, right? We look at the wonder of bees. We look at butterflies and their unimaginable beauty. We look at the depth of the ocean. We see worlds of unimaginable and dazzling nuance and subtle beauty that blows our hearts open again and again. And then we begin to read the poetry, right? The poetry of existence. We begin to read the poetry of science and the poetry of the humanities, right? And we realize that this is a love story. There's no other actual way to explain it. Reality is an intimate universe, and the movement of reality, a whole book we're writing on this, is the progressive deepening of intimacies. And those are certainties. We actually have direct access to those experiences. We can taste it directly. Our entire lives are built around it. So then, when we run into outrageous pain, we don't try and explain it away. We don't try and control it. We respond with outrageous love. And outrageous love means we commit outrageous acts of love. 1. 2, we protest. We turn as Abraham and Moses did to the divine force, and we say, we know that you're not just the infinity of power. We know you're the infinity of intimacy because we experience that in our own lives. And we say to you, what the fuck? We protest, we scream and protest. But when we scream and protest, we're affirming the dignity of life. When we scream and protest, we're actually affirming the goodness of reality. And we hold the uncertainty, bow before the mystery, even as we seek to change and transform and heal every drop of suffering in reality because we're outrageous lovers. And we actually step in, right, to create a world that actually works for everyone. We actually respond and anticipate natural disaster in the best way that we can. So that's the next point. Now, one more point. And this is a big one. Okay, this is a big one, and we can't move without this, which is, what happens when it's over? Right? In other words, when you think about reality as a love story, you have to think beyond the boundaries of this dimension, right? So if we think about reality as a love story, we can't just think about what happens until the moment of death. We have to think beyond. We have to think in a a wider field of value in Eros. Does that make sense? We have to be in a wider field of value in Eros. So at the moment that I die, and let's say I die unfairly, as most of my family did in the Holocaust. Let's say I die unfairly, okay? Let's say I die unfairly, which is tragic and horrific. And we have no right to use theologic to explain it away, right? Neither Buddhist theologic or New Age theologic or classical axial religion theologic. That's a given. But now, what happens at the moment that I die? So do I go into eternal nothingness, meaning it's over, game over, death is the end, in which case you cannot talk about reality as a love story in any way that's ultimately significant. It's made up. We're trying to make it up. It just can't actually be true. Because within one lifetime, it's very clear that we don't have equitable fairness for every human being. It's just not the way reality is structured. Why? Mystery. Why is that true? Mystery. We're holding the mystery. We're protesting. We're committing outrageous acts of love. 1, protest. 2, outrageous acts of love. Those are the 2 meanings of we live in a world of outrageous pain. The only response is outrageous love. And now stay close, my friends. And now, within one lifetime, if I actually feel that no one's a stranger and no one's left out of the circle, I can't actually experience reality as being a love story. Reality is a love story only if I actually understand that it's not over when it's over. That actually death itself is a night between 2 days. But that is not a faith claim. That's not a New Age claim. And it's not a fundamentalist religious claim. For the first time in human history, we have access to 3 forms of information that there are 3 information streams, 3 fields of gnosis that tell us 2 things. 1, there's a huge mystery of death. We don't exactly know what happens. No one's come back for a long period of time, at least, and given us detailed information. No one's come back and said, okay, here I am. I've been away for 2 years. Now I'm back. We don't have that kind of information. So there's clearly a mystery of death. That's the unknowing. That's that first principle. It's the hidden. And yet there's the hidden and the revealed. Opposites are joined at the hip. There's mystery and gnosis. And for the first time in the last 130 or 40 years, we have an enormous amount of depth knowing, which tells us that it's not over when it's over. Now, this is a very, very big topic, and I'm not going to go into it now. I'm just going to say just 3 things. 1, we have actual empirical information, which has been very carefully checked. The British Cyclical Society was started in Cambridge by Henry and Edith Sedgwick. I believe their last names were, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He was a brilliant professor at Cambridge. And then Sedgwick's colleague, William James, started at Harvard, another version of the American Cyclical Society. And we have now 150 years of research, of probably the most carefully vetted research to actually ferret out the charlatans and to ferret out the hoaxes and to ferret out the sloppy informational reportings. And after we ferreted all that out, we have a huge body of direct information that tells us that consciousness lives independently of the body. Number 1, that consciousness lives independently of the body. Number 2, that there's actually direct communication, at least in some instances, in which information is conveyed after a person's died, which is not explicable by any of what you might think were the explanations. I mean, it's not explicable by, for example, the relative of a person who's died is holding information and the medium is reading their mind and that's telling us something. No, there's carefully controlled investigations which have shown us that actually we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, actual real information, vetted, carefully gathered for 150 years, that we actually have information from people after they pass, which couldn't be available in any other way than through that person. And the person who does a very, very careful analysis of this is one of the greatest Whiteheadian scholars that ever lived, David Ray Griffin, who Zachary and I communicated before he passed, right? He's a beautiful, beautiful man. And actually was excited and confirmed to us, what he thought was Whitehead's support of cosmoerotic humanism. And David wrote a book called Parapsychology, Philosophy and Spirituality, in which he examines the evidence very, very carefully and very, very conservatively, and comes to the conclusion that there's definitive and incontrovertible evidence that points very directly to the continuity of consciousness, Occam's razor, as the only explanation we know that could work for it, right? Beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's a very big deal. So actually, that's one source of information. There's other sources of information, which are philosophical in their nature, which I'm not going to go into, which is the critique of materialism. And there's other sources of information, which are what I would call anthro-ontological in their nature, meaning we actually have a direct experience within us that it's not over when it's over. Meaning, I'll just give you one sentence on it. Because we have a direct experience that fairness is real, that fairness or justice, although those are not quite the same, but that fairness and justice are real, that reality demands fairness. And we know, number two, that fairness is not accomplished within one lifetime. That tells us that actually the story of reality can't exhaust itself in one lifetime. How many people followed that? Who followed that? Right? And it's because I have an experience, right, that fairness is real. It's a real experience. To know fairness is a real structure of reality. Children, cross cultures, right, demand fairness. It's not a cultural social construct. It's a universal, intrinsic structure of every human being is the demand for fairness. Since there's demand for fairness, and we know too that fairness is not exhausted in one lifetime, that actually tells us that the story of reality can't be limited to one lifetime. That's the anthro-ontological method. So there's what I would call the new empirical approach. There's the anthro-ontological approach, and then there's the philosophical approach, which I haven't gone into. But all three of those come to one conclusion. It's not over when it's over, friends. There's continuity of consciousness, without question. That's a big deal. So there's mystery. We don't know exactly how it works. But there's also a new knowing. Now, that doesn't justify in any way suffering. In any way. We're not using this in the old way as a theodicy. Oh, now we can justify suffering. No, our only response to suffering, we live in a world of outrageous pain. Only response is outrageous love. Outrageous love means, one, we commit outrageous acts of love. Two, we protest. We protest because reality is outrageous love. We therefore can turn to the divine in ourselves and in the structure of the field of value and say, we protest. But when we protest, we're not screaming against God. We are the voice of the divine screaming out and demanding transformation, right? Demanding that Syria and Turkey take themselves seriously and actually become outrageous lovers, which they are not today. And the universal grammar of value, it's why we need a universal grammar of value, where we need a shared story of value. So we as an international community can turn to the United States if it need to be the United States, or to Aleppo if it be Aleppo, right? Or to Turkey if it be Turkey, and say, hey, we got to be outrageous lovers together. That's not an option. An outrageous lover actually does everything they can do to respond, right, to natural disaster. And what if we knew that when a person passes, they don't go into oblivion and they go into fire and brimstone hell set up by a malevolent, cruel divinity, but a person actually is embraced by the field of the infinite, tachat kanfei hashchina, by the wings of the goddess. And there's a sense of integrity and justice and of coming home and of welcome. There's a welcome sign in this world, but there's also a welcome sign at death's door. It's welcome to the next stage of the journey. Welcome to the next stage of your life, not as a fanciful claim, but as actually the best empirical understanding we have of reality today. And so in cosmologic humanism, in this new story of value, we need to actually realize that reality is a love story. Reality is a love story, and we're experiencing that as we see outrageous lovers, right, all over Aleppo and Turkey. Reality is a love story because we protest any act which violates that love story. And we demand it not be that way because we know in our bodies it's not supposed to be that way because that love story lives in us. Reality is a love story because there's a continuity of consciousness, which moves beyond this lifetime. Reality is a love story because we actually experience the good, the true, and the beautiful. We experience the radical certainty. We taste that love story in our bodies, which are love stories themselves, in the molecular, atomic world, right? In all forms and dimensions of the biosphere and in the human world. Love stories every place and everywhere, right? Every song. The third time we said it, every song a love song. Right? It's totally a love story. So in all four of those ways, we know it's a love story. And in a love story, we hold uncertainty. We bow before the mystery, but not as faithful fools, but as those who have experienced radical trust in reality. We trust reality even as we scream out in protest and say, what the fuck? And in that moment, we only have the question, and we only have the agony, and we only have the void. And then we move through the void and we find life again. Wow. And that's the chant that Chris just started with, right, friends? To speak of your love in the morning and to trust you through the night, right? So that's what we say to each other. We look in each other's voice and we say to speak of your love in the morning, to trust you through the night. We turn to the infinity of intimacy and we say, infinity of intimacy, to speak of your love in the morning, to trust you through the night. And this week's been a night. And we scream and protest and we're furious with you. But we know, taste and see, we know the goodness of reality. And so we hold the mystery, and we hold the uncertainty, we hold the agony. And if you read the text carefully in the original Hebrew, Lagid baboker chasdecha, to speak of your love in the morning, ve'emunatcha balelot, and the divine voice says to us, and I trust you through the night. I trust you to build buildings according to building codes. I trust you to be outrageous lovers, right? To actually create a world which no one's outside of the circle. The most beautiful world that could ever be created in human history. We have the potential to create today. That's what we're here to do. Oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We live in a world of outrageous pain. Like the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love.